If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello listeners, I'm your speaker Casey, and as many of you may know, I am currently undertaking the Psychology of Coercive Control Master's course at Salford University. I hope that this course will make me more informed and better equipped for future projects and interviews on the podcast. In the meantime, I will be releasing renewed versions of older episodes with updates from previous guests. If you want to find out what I remember from the time of each interview and get in-depth updates from the guests, I've been writing blog posts as I go through older episodes and adding them to my website, cultvaultpodcast.com, which you can also find links to in the episode description. You can find links on my website for support on navigating recovery from cultic abuse, to learn more about how to help a loved one, or become more informed about the subject of cults and coercive control. My emails are still open, and I am carefully curating a list of guests to speak with once I am back to interviewing officially next year. You can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com if you'd like to get in touch. And now, on to today's
patrons,
updated
and welcome
episode.
to this month's exclusive episode. As usual, I wanted to express my gratitude and appreciation for your continued support. I will be covering the Anthill Kids. With a ruthless and masochistic self-proclaimed prophet for a leader, if you've heard of this case before, you'll know it has themes of physical and sexual assault, violence, mutilation, and gore. Before we jump into things, I need to reference the book I managed to get a lot of this information from, and today's episode will include some direct passages from this book. It's called Savage Messiah, The Shocking Story of Cult Leader Rock Terrio and the Women Who Loved Him by Paul Kaler and Ross Laver. Also, I want to apologise in advance for the mispronunciation of locations and names, as a lot of these are going to be French. I did look them up in advance, but I anticipate that I will get some of them incorrect, so I do apologise. And I'm also just coming over the back end of a cold, so if my voice sounds a bit tickly, then that is why. So without further ado, our story starts in 1947, when a blue-eyed baby boy was born to parents Hyacinth and Pierrette Theriot. Descendants of one of the oldest families in Canada, Rock grew up in Saguenay Valley, in rural Quebec, with his mother, father, and 6 other siblings. Claudette was the eldest, born in 1945. Then Rock, Remy, Lorraine, Rosaire, Orchard, and Rachel. They had another daughter called Monique, but unfortunately she died in infancy. The Theriots can apparently be linked all the way back to Jean and Pierre Theriot, who came to Canada in the 1640s. Rock's family would eventually move to the Thetford mines. They lived in a small frame house in Rivière-du-Moulin, a small village that has since been absorbed into the city of Chicoutimi. Rock Theriot was the oldest of the boys, and neighbours allegedly reported the family as being loud and unkempt, with their father being described by Rock as abusive. Family and friends would describe Rock as intelligent and insightful, and teachers would often describe Rock as always reading, bringing homework in on time, and also very intelligent. Teachers also remarked that each Theriot kid appeared to be clean and tidy despite what neighbours had said. Rock and all of his siblings finished school at grade 7. The local education system didn't offer any further grades, and none of the siblings, including Rock, enrolled in further education. His teachers were surprised by this, as Rock showed so much potential. Despite this, Rock would go on to learn the Old Testament word for word. His family were very devout Catholics, and his father was more devout than most. Religion was his one true passion. Rock's father belonged to an authoritarian quasi-fascist protest group called the White Berets that campaigned for conservative values in the Christian church. The White Berets were an offshoot of the Creditiste movement, which arose during the time of the Great Depression in rural Quebec at a time of political and social upheaval. Rock had 2 different childhoods, the one that he described to others, and the one that others remember Rock having. He claimed that his father was abusive, that he never had the childhood he deserved. Rock claimed that his father was a hard man and that he deserved better as a child. Rock often spoke of the hardships he endured, but how he was at one with nature and that animals would interact and speak with him. He often spoke to people about having infantile paralysis at the age of 6 and coming face to face with a bear and 2 cubs whilst gambling in the muskeg. Rock claimed that the mother bear rolled him over and over in this idyllic circumstance. However, Rock's mum would later tell the psychologist that Rock had spilled this story to that they never lived in such places, and this field that Rock described didn't exist. Witnesses to the childhood of Rock testified to the hardness of Rock's father, but claimed that he was never violent, as Rock had so often described. Rock's father also alleges that Rock made things up. He says, quote, "He once told someone that after my daughter Monique died, I kept the body for 10 months before I buried it. That is not true." Thetford Mines was an asbestos mining town with a population of 18,500 people. It was located between the St. Lawrence River and the Maine border. Hyacinth built a white cement block bungalow on Airport Road, a semi-rural area known for its cheap land due to the busy flight paths over the whole area. As the oldest son, Rock was often forced by his religious father to join his father in going door to door to hand out propaganda and spreading the good word. Eventually, Rock would grow tiresome and resentful towards Catholicism and uncomfortable with the arrangement of going door to door. According to witnesses, when Hyacinth would lead the children out on house calls, as soon as the doors opened, the children would fall to their knees exactly as their father had taught them, bowing their heads and reciting prayer. As soon as the Amen was spoken, Hyacinth would ask for donations for the White Beret newspaper. At one point, Rock would become interested in the occult, and his friend Andre Gregor recommended Rock for initiation into a secret society, a local branch of the Amarist Club, the French-Canadian equivalent of the Shriners. Rock eventually worked his way up to president of the initiation, but as soon as he gained control of the committee, eyebrows were raised as well as suspicions, Rock demanding that all new members wear an image of Satan on their backs. Andre is quoted saying, "We were just a bunch of Catholic guys. We couldn't accept his strange ideas, so Rock moved on." Rock was described as having electric blue eyes, a handsome man who attracted the attention of women, and by November 11, 1967, on Remembrance Day, Rock married his first wife, Francine Grenier. They were married at St. Joseph de Coleraine Church. The event was a big one, with both bride and groom having their entire families present. Francine lived in the next town over, and Hyacinth explained their relationship as, quote, "stormy and ill-fated from the beginning." Rock soon built a 1.5-story frame house with rough sawn pine siding and a tall chimney. The address was located on Airport Road, just a kilometre away from his father's house. Over the next 3 years, they would have 2 children named Rock Sylvain and Francois. Rock Jr. was born on January 10, 1969, just before Rock needed to undergo major surgery. Francine described Rock this way, quote, "He's a very convincing and hypnotic person. If anyone is insecure, he can make them feel anything," end quote. These 2 children would be the first of Rock's alleged 30 children in total. After the birth of his first child, Rock developed stomach ulcers and was advised to undergo a surgical procedure. These ulcers would continue to have a negative effect on Rock's life, causing constant discomfort. The surgery Rock received would also kickstart Rock's future obsession with anatomy and alternative medicine. He underwent a 5-hour operation for duodenal ulcers at Montreal's Sacré-Cœur Hospital. Dr. Robert Weigand removed an ulcer from the interior wall of Rock's stomach and cut away a portion of the organ 10 by 18 centimetres. Later that year, Rock's condition became worse and he ended up undergoing a second operation to remove another smaller section of his stomach and to also sever his gastric nerves. In the early 70s, Rock got himself involved in local politics. When neighbours joined a committee to protest against how construction permits were issued, Rock saw opportunity to finally be listened to and heard. He got his hands on a copy of the municipal code and memorised it from A to Z, meaning he was able to challenge anyone on any part of the code at any time. He ran for office in December 1975. Rock got himself a seat on the city council as a member for the Thetford Mines area. But members soon began getting annoyed and fed up with Rock. He would take the opportunity to talk at meetings and would begin going on ramblings about how things needed to change now. Parks needed to be built immediately and old houses need to be renovated. This all sounded great on paper, but he wouldn't hear it when others would talk to him about chain of command, votes, and money needed in the pot for all of these projects. Suddenly, in May 1976, Rock stopped attending meetings, and the councillors were able to remove him from office using a bylaw that allowed people to be removed if they remained absent for 3 months or longer. It was at this time that Rock took up woodworking as a way to make money. Going against his doctor's advice, Rock stopped taking the medication for his stomach. Another thing he developed was a growing addiction to alcohol, most likely to dull the chronic stomach pains at first. Rock would begin putting his door-to-door experience and woodworking skills to good use by going out on woodworking sales in Quebec. Francine was unsure during this time how Rock was bringing home money, and she rarely saw any of it. The debts and bills were piling up around Francine, and she suspected Rock was spending time with other women. Hyacinth threatened to kick Rock off of his land for running up bills, and eventually, Rock's business went bankrupt. The local credit union swamped in and repossessed the house, forcing Francine and the children into a small apartment. To make ends meet, Francine began working a restaurant job. At this time, she cut Rock off, no longer wanting anything to do with her husband. In fact, during his travels, Rock met many women with whom he would spend time with, becoming unfaithful to his wife before she stopped contact. One of these mistresses was named Giselle. Giselle was born on March 16, 1951. Much like Rock, she had many siblings. She loved her father very much, but he travelled for work and would often stay away for months at a time. He would send money home to Giselle's mum for clothes and food, but the kids rarely benefited from this money. Giselle's mum liked to get dressed up and go out at night, spending money on new clothes for herself and living the high life. Giselle's older siblings moved out as soon as they could, leaving Giselle to care for her younger siblings. When their mother would go out at night, she would lock them in the attic for hours at a time. When Giselle's father returned home from work once or twice a year, their mother cooked, cleaned, and played the dutiful housewife. Giselle's father, whom she admired so much, would tell her that when she finds a husband, she must be a good wife. Unlike Giselle's mother, she must obey her husband. Giselle eventually left home and would find herself in an abusive relationship, drinking lots of alcohol and generally unhappy with the way her life was going. She would move back home with her parents, ecstatic to see her father now working locally and spending more time with him. However, her relationship with her mother still suffered. It would be only a year before she would have to leave again. This time she moved in with her sister, and it was around this time that she was introduced to Rock Thériault. Rock pursued Giselle for many months, meeting her in a dance hall one night in 1969. He was selling handmade wooden beer mugs. Giselle said she wasn't as instantly attracted to Rock, but she was interested in his confidence and knowledge on different subject matters. He eventually managed to get Giselle's address from her, and for the next few weeks would show up unannounced, staying for hours and hours, drinking until the early hours of the morning. At this time, Giselle had a boyfriend named Robert, who eventually proposed. Giselle got cold feet and began realising that she had affections for Rock. She broke off her relationship with Robert and allowed Rock to start staying the night. He would talk for hours about his abusive parents, playing in the woods as a child, and being taken in by a mother bear who would roll him around as she did with her cubs. He told Giselle all about his estranged wife, who kicked him out, who was constantly drinking and sleeping with half of the men in the town. Giselle believed this at first. Rock was every woman's dream. She said he was charming, worldly, and intelligent, the kind of man who loved nature and would never hurt a fly. But there was also a dark side to this man. When Giselle asked Rock if he was married, she recalls him bursting into tears, finally admitting that he was, but that his wife was awful. Rock told Giselle that his wife was a bad mother. Moving into her own one-bedroom apartment, Rock would often stop by. Occasionally he would bring his children. Giselle often thought about what Rock had said about their mother Francine, so she would treat the children, spoiling them with love, affection, and candies. Giselle recalls how they travelled together, her and Rock, on that first summer. She said that Rock had a growing affinity for drinking copious amounts of alcohol, but he also kept her entertained. They travelled selling his woodwork, and whenever they entered a bar, hotel, or restaurant, Rock would bring the place to life. He kept her entertained as much as he kept her thrilled with bouts of extreme sickness due to being paralytic. After this first summer, things would change when Rock found religion, specifically in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, I've mentioned the Seventh-day Adventists and their history in my Branch Davidian coverage, and I was shocked to learn the relevance this religious movement has in the tragic unfolding of this cult story too. At some point, in the late January or early February of 1977, the Seventh-day Adventist Church took their roaming proselytizing campaigns to the Catholic-heavy area of Thetford Mines. The handbill went out, ads appeared in papers, and televangelists announced it on TV. Sitting in the audience on one of these nights, at a sermon led by Pierre Zita, would be a prematurely bald Rock Thériault who would later become enthralled by the message of the end times coming from Zita and a chance to undermine his father's Catholic faith. The group would meet for weeks every Saturday in a motel. By May, Zita managed to get Rock a job selling Adventist literature door to door. His experience with door-to-door sales, his charisma and his woodwork bartering days made him a stellar salesman, and it didn't take long for Rock to become a person with the highest sales in his entire district. Another way the church recruited new members was to put on stop-smoking workshops. However, these never proved to gather as many potential converts as the Adventists hoped for. So Rock, using his wit and intelligence, would go selling Adventist material door to door. He would look around the houses for ashtrays, or sniff the air to see if there seemed to be any smokers in the house. He would sell the workshops as well as his Adventist material. Becoming a devout member of the church, Rock gave up drinking. He would often sleep in his van and not with Giselle. It appeared as though he was not engaging in sexual intercourse, even though he still was, as he was legally married to Francine, and sex outside of marriage was frowned upon within the church and classed as one of the worst sins. Rock even adopted the Adventist diet, which included vegetarianism and cutting out dairy. He became obsessed with the Old Testament, particularly around patriarchy. Giselle recalls Rock pointing to lines in the Bible and speaking at length about women, the role of a woman, and the patriarchal world that women should adhere to. In the early summer of 1977, Rock had launched a number of his own stop-smoking workshops. He studied maps to plan his next crusades. One took place in a particular area called Plessersville. It was at these meetings that Rock's cult would soon be born. He met 3 young women, Solange Boillard, aged 21, Chantal Lebris, aged 19, and Francine Laflamme, aged 18. They attended Zita's usual preliminary sermons, ones that slowly introduced the ideas and a positive way of life, and slowly introduced Adventism into those workshops. The women seemed eager to accept the church into their lives, and soon they were focusing less on Zita and more on the bearded man with the blue eyes, who would talk at length with them about the church, faith, and his upbringing and abusive father, and stomach problems and philosophy. The 3 young women, however, were not alone. They were following a young man named Jacques Fassé. A few years older than the 3 women, it was he who suggested they first attend these meetings, and before long, Rock would sit with all 4 of them for hours at a time, talking about the end times. Solange Boillard was born March 2nd, 1956, the youngest of 4 boys and 3 girls, raised by Raoul and Laurette Boillard in Inverness, Quebec, a small agricultural community 60 kilometres from Plessersville. Solange was bright, motivated and inspired. She had enrolled in a 3-year business administration program at a junior college in Thetford Mines. She was living in a small apartment near the college. She took the bus to visit her parents every weekend. By the 2nd year of the program, her behaviour began to change. Solange, a slender girl with delicate looks and long brown hair, had begun to hang around with Jacques Fassé, a farmer's son who had grown up in the same small area as Solange. Jacques apparently dabbled in everything, from black magic to marijuana. Solange was excited by him. Solange began skipping classes, and when she babysat once for her older sister and her 2 kids, her sister came home and could tell Solange was stoned. Through Jacques Fassé, Solange would meet 2 other young women. Chantal Lebris was born March 30th, 1958, and she was the 2nd oldest of 6 children. She was raised by Catholic parents in a village next to Plessersville. She was described by her mother Victoria as very delicate and emotionally sensitive. Her grade 11 teacher described her as extremely shy and introverted. Next to Chantal was Francine Laflamme. Her mother described her as stubborn, bull-headed and full of character. She was talkative, bright, and soughting the affection of boys at school, and she quickly became known as a party girl. In the summer of 1977, Francine was living with her parents. She'd finished up high school and was preparing to enroll into a fashion design program that autumn. Chantel's parents recall a time when Rock showed up at their house to deliver a Bible lesson. Chantel's mum Victoria recalls, quote, "He talked to me about his beliefs for quite a while, and whenever he couldn't answer the questions that I was giving him, he would kneel and chant and go into trances. From then on, I don't think he liked us. He knew that we had figured him out." Chantel's mum remembers her daughter becoming depressed and withdrawn after getting involved with Rock. She began calling Rock master and carrying around a Bible. Her natural introverted and moody disposition only worsened by Rock's hold on her. Victoria remembers feeling her daughter slip away from them, changing from the 19-year-old that they had raised. One Saturday, after a lengthy Sabbath session, Zita offered to put the three ladies up for the night, but Rock insisted they came back with him, back to Giselle's one-bedroom apartment. Without mentioning a thing to Giselle, this became a weekly occurrence. Rock became obsessed with the power he held over these girls, and even over Jacques Fisset, who would join them most of the time. Rock was not having sex with any of these women, as Giselle always kept a watchful eye over the growing situation happening around her in the apartment. But it wouldn't be long before Rock would find more women to bring back to Giselle's place. Nicole Rule was born May 20 of 1957 in another small community by Thetford Mines. Nicole had always struck her family as happy until the death of her mother in October 1975. She dropped out at grade 12 and began drinking and using hard drugs. There were stories of pills, needles and prostitution. Rock found Nicole, inviting her to a stop-smoking clinic and eventually to the living room of Giselle's apartment. In the same month, one night in the summer of 1977, Rock would find Claude Ouellette, a 24-year-old from the same Plessisville area. He met Claude at a local disco. When Claude approached a woman with shoulder-length brown hair, that person would be Francine Laflamme, and despite preparing to join optician school in the autumn, Claude followed Francine and Rock instead. Francine Laflamme then introduced her friends to Rock, Maurice Lambert, aged 18, and Josie Pelletier, aged 20. By the end of the month, in 1977, Giselle would have Jacques Fisset and his three lady friends over most weekends, Nicole Rule living in the apartment full-time, Claude Ouellette hanging around a lot, and Laflamme's two high school friends even dropping by. Rock had become a magnet for 6 women and 2 men. Giselle became increasingly frustrated, often trying to integrate herself with the group by mothering the guests or acting coldly towards them to insinuate she was annoyed at the presence of all these people in her apartment. She recalls how they would often rub Rock's shoulders and back, and this made her extremely jealous. Then she remembered Rock was going to become a priest, and that she had nothing to worry about with infidelity. Rock would say to her, quote, "If you don't help these people, Giselle, God will remember." Still, Rock's recruitment didn't end there. In the month of July 1977, Rock and his band accessed an Adventist retreat at Lake Rousseau. 2 backpackers in their late 20s would arrive at the retreat and become employed as chambermaids. Their names were Gabrielle Laval and Yolande Guinebert. They both spoke English and plunged into Bible studies whilst at the retreat. Gabrielle was born New Year's Eve 1949, only a short distance from where Rock lived as a toddler. Gabrielle recalls a childhood of sexual abuse and molestation by her father and another family member. In 1967, she finished high school and enrolled in college to study nursing. She became a licensed and registered nurse on July 9, 1970. She then began working at the emergency department of a local hospital. She had an affair with a married man who would eventually declare that he planned to stay with his wife and not leave her for Gabrielle. And Gabrielle began feeling stuck in her job. She soon fell in love with a former heroin addict, and this was where Gabrielle began using hard drugs and running up bills, becoming a stripper to cover her debts under the name of Foxy Lady. She later broke up with her boyfriend and began posing in pornographic magazines, and moved in with a nightclub owner many years older than her. She soon met up with an old friend, Yolande Guinebert, and they decided to travel through Central America together. Gabrielle was eager to adopt a healthier and more meaningful life, so they wound up at a missionary health clinic in Guatemala. where Gabrielle began studying alternative medicine, something her and Rock would obsess over together later on. When Rock finally met Gabrielle at Lake Rousseau, she said, quote, "I felt something from his palm. It burned my hand. For a few seconds, I just couldn't pull away. I wanted to, but it was like our hands were glued together. I remember thinking, this man has a lot of charisma." End quote. When Gabrielle informed Rock she was a nurse, he grew even more fascinated with her and was eager to show her off to the rest of the group. Giselle immediately hated Gabrielle, describing her as narcissistic, beautiful and self-centered. She only talked about herself and all the experiences and travelling she had done. Giselle hated that Rock was interested in her, and she felt immediately threatened. Priests at the retreat watched Rock carefully as he interacted with the two chambermaids, and then one priest heard something he didn't like at all. Rock had wandered off from the hotel, telling his group that no one must follow him. He hiked up the rocky bluff to worship, and it was here that he claims God gave him a vision. He declared to everyone that the vision had told him the ground he was about to kneel on was sacred. Up high on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, the priest was reminded of the story of Moses, and this troubled him deeply. He believed Rock had crossed the line, acting as if he had a direct line to God. Rock spent the entire retreat convincing Gabrielle and Yolandi to return to Thetford Mines with him. It took the entire trip, but eventually he received a yes, and together they all returned to Giselle's apartment. Despite her resentment, Giselle remembers that Rock was devoted to her, and she enjoyed the quiet time the two of them would spend with Rock's children away from the group, until one particular night when Giselle went to tuck the boys in and say goodnight and found Gabrielle in the bedroom, all three of them kneeling on the floor, as Gabrielle led them in prayer in the same manner that Rock would lead prayer. Giselle burnt with rage. She recalls wanting to punch Gabrielle in her stuck-up face. Giselle couldn't take it anymore. She felt like she couldn't breathe. She told Rock she was leaving him, and she returned to her parents. Her mother was acting coldly, but her father was excited to see her. On the first night away from Rock, she cried into her pillow for hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she thought of Rock. Eventually, he called her parents home, and Giselle said she felt instantly at ease, warm and euphoric, like a drug addict receiving a fix. He said, quote, "Giselle, you know in your heart that you belong here with me. I need you and the boys need you, and you know how much we love you. You and I, we have so much to do for God. I can't continue my work without you." End quote. Giselle tried to reason about the women in the flat, tried to tell Rock that things were upsetting her, but he had an explanation and an answer for everything. So soon, Giselle returned to him. Adventist priest Zita became increasingly concerned about Rock. Not only was he pretending to be a faithful Adventist by sleeping in his van and not engaging in premarital intercourse, he had recruited a whole raft of people to live in the tiny apartment. People around town began talking and speculating. Zita believed this didn't favour the Adventist Church or paint them in a good light as they worked to recruit new members and convert those committed to Catholicism. Solange Boilard's sister had incorrectly determined that Rock was running a prostitution ring with him as the pimp. Solange was scheduled to enter her third year of business administration. This would never happen despite pleas from family members. Aulette would never enroll in optician school even after his parents pled with him, and Francine Laflamme would never attend her fashion design course. Chantal Labrie wouldn't begin her second year of junior college, and Rock had convinced them all that the end times were near. God would not want to see them wasting their time with further education and training when they should be preparing for the apocalypse and his second coming. Rock began to worry that they would all eventually want to get on with their own lives, so he enrolled a few of them into selling Adventist literature door to door. But this wasn't enough. Soon he came up with an idea. He would continue with his stop smoking clinics, and he would introduce a vegetarian banquet at the end. He would use Adventist-approved dishes like lentil soup and carrot cake. This gave the women plenty of work to do, and with preparing the halls and meals. He would feed every participant with a free banquet and then request donations, which often turned out huge returns, given that many people felt guilty eating free food and giving nothing in return. Soon, Rock would come across his new victims. In September 1977, the women went out to sell their Adventist materials and recruit people for the Stop Smoking Vegetarian Banquet workshops. In attendance would be husband and wife, Jacques, 24 years old, and Maurice Grenier, 23. They had a 6-month-old child. Jacques lost his brother that he was very close to years before meeting Roch, and when he stumbled across Theriot, he said it was like a revelation. Back in Thetford Mines, the parents of those following Roch were becoming increasingly concerned. Claude's parents spent hours attempting to convince him to enroll in opticians college, but Claude said no. Solange's parents were becoming disturbed, and Chantal's parents were frantic. Chantal's mum Victoria had distrusted Roch from the word go. She recommended her daughter visit the family doctor, who recommended from there that Chantal speak to a psychologist. After the meeting, Chantal had agreed to check herself into the hospital for a 4-week examination. During this time, Roch was beginning to notice that there was no longer any space left on Giselle's floor for sleeping bags. They had officially run out of space. In Steamery, a few miles away, Roch had noticed a 2-story clapboard building with a store on the ground floor and several bedrooms upstairs. He put down a cash deposit on the property, but didn't tell the others straight away. First, Roch decided he needed to retrieve Chantal from the hospital, so the group loaded up in the van, entered the hospital, and as they stood around Chantal's bed, telling her how much they missed her and needed her, she packed her things there and then, checked out of the hospital, and was on her way with the others to Steamery before Chantal's family even had a chance to find out that she'd left the hospital. The group were happy when Roch told them about the news of the building in Steamery. Giselle felt relieved about having more living space. Roch spoke about how they would open their own alternative medicine shop on the ground floor and sell natural foods that met the Adventism diet. Gabrielle was excited about the prospect of participating in medicine again, and the others felt the group finally had a purpose. This period of time, the first day setting up the clinic, would be the small window of the idyllic life Roch promised his followers, but it wouldn't last long. Claude described this time, saying, quote, "Belonging to the group was fun. We had some great times at the beginning, and Roch made us feel like we stood out from the rest of society. He talked about chosen people in the Bible. We were to be the people of God. The business was named the Healthy Living Clinic. It claimed to cure any ailment for cash up front. Competition to win the affections of Roch began to infect the group, and Giselle was noticing. She resented Gabrielle, who seemed to speak louder when Roch was around, mostly about herself and how experienced and well-travelled she was. One night, Roch told Francine she didn't need her eyeglasses, that they were a technological crutch, and Roch could fix her short-sightedness with a holistic diet. After this, Gabrielle took Francine's glasses and snapped them in half, beaming up at Roch as she did this. Roch's smile warned the others not to berate this action from Gabrielle, but he realised he needed to do something about the growing levels of competition within the group. To show his followers they were all equal, he came up with the idea of a uniform. He announced that his group would wear similar clothing. It would symbolise their unity and their rejection from society, as well as reinforcing the idea that they were all equal. Using Maurice Grenier's sewing machine, Giselle made a loose ankle-length cotton tunic that tied at the waist with a rope. The women's frocks were pale green, and the men's were beige. Roch, however, being the leader, had a dark brown tunic, just like a Franciscan monk, and depicting his rank as clearly different from the rest of the group. He was not equal to them, but above them. Roch also demanded that the women wear no bras. Gabrielle hated being in a tunic and felt that everyday clothes were more practical, but she would soon succumb to peer pressure and begin donning her own pale green tunic. By this time, the clinic, along with the stop smoking workshops, was earning a few thousand a week, and the services must have had a positive effect because customers even began offering to volunteer and help at the clinic and at the workshops. Leo Forcher sold his house and all of its contents, joining the group with his wife and child. He handed Roch around $5,000 in cash. Soon, Jacques and his wife Maurice also gave up worldly possessions to join the group. They sold their house, furniture, and a brand new Ford van, giving all the proceeds to Roch. Forcher would later become an Adventist minister and open up his own healthy living clinic. Francine also managed to convince her high school friends to join, Maurice Lambert and José Pelletier. In December, Maurice told her son's parents that she was quitting school, and Josie followed a month later. By this stage, Giselle had waited and waited and waited for Rock to propose. She could see the other girls fighting so hard for his affection, and she worried that if she didn't make the marriage official, the others may think they stood a chance at winning him over. Sick of waiting, Giselle proposed to Rock just before Christmas. He laughed in her face, saying, "Are you crazy?" But a week later on Giselle's birthday, New Year's Eve, he said yes. Gabrielle burned with a rage of jealousy. The wedding took place on January the 8th, 1978. Giselle couldn't be happier for the two of them to finally get alone time on their wedding night and possibly even vacation for a short honeymoon. But when the entire group bundled in the van to drive back to the clinic, Giselle realised that none of this was going to happen. Rock laughed and joked the whole way back with the other girls, while Giselle laid crying in the back of the van, curled up on the bed floor. She began to suspect that Rock had gone through with this marriage as a front to the church, who were becoming increasingly wary of his presence and his actions. They began having sex less and less, and Giselle said that she felt he only did have sex with her to shut her up. She said, "When we made love, it didn't feel the same anymore." It was Pastor Nathan Prosper who led the marriage ceremony, a man Rock had known for a while now, since his time with the Seventh-day Adventists. Prosper has attempted to keep an eye on the women, to even speak with them when Rock wasn't around. He had noticed the growing situation and worried about the girls, but Prosper remembers how Rock would never leave them alone. He wouldn't let them out of their sight, even for a moment. Maurice Grenier's parents phoned the police about the influence he appeared to have on the group, but when the police visited, there wasn't a lot they could do. Rock did speak on behalf of all of the residents as they pottered around in the clinic behind Rock, but if the sons and daughters had given up their worldly possessions on their own, nothing could be done. In March, the police would return to the Healthy Living Clinic. Geraldine Auclair had been admitted to Rock's clinic. She was previously undergoing treatment for leukemia at a hospital. Rock, who had been spreading his message to her husband, convinced the spouse to let Rock visit his wife in hospital. When he arrived, he began kicking up a storm, screaming at the doctors and professionals about the amount of drugs Geraldine was being given. By all accounts, she was recovering. Rock convinced Geraldine's husband to check her out of the hospital and into his clinic. The whole time Geraldine was there, her father was not permitted to enter the building. Rock refused Geraldine's father access to his daughter, and after being on a treatment of grape juice and organic foods, she died shortly after she arrived. Rock claimed that he kissed Geraldine and her eyes fluttered open. She was resurrected, but she couldn't stay. He said, quote, "When God wants people, he takes them," end quote. Soon, a 19-year-old woman with multiple sclerosis was admitted to the clinic by parents who had spoken to Rock. Her name was Gabrielle Nadeau. Although she was bedridden in the hospital, her treatment with Rock did nothing to help. His holistic therapies failed, and soon she died too. Rock began feeling paranoid about his position in the community, beginning to feel the us versus them mentality sweep in. Anyone outside of the group started looking like an enemy to Rock, someone who wanted to take his followers from him or shut down his clinic. By this time, Rock had also begun drinking again, heavily. A month after Geraldine's death, the pastors of the Seventh-day Adventist Church met with one another to discuss the situation. They agreed that Rock had not managed to bring his followers any closer to God, but in fact had only brought them closer to himself, and so they decided to strip him of his church membership. But this did little to affect Rock's mood. It only ignited more passion to keep his followers close. Because of this, he decided he would marry his followers to one another. He matched the pairs himself. Jacques Fisset was married to Nicole, and Claude Oulette was married to Solange. Solange phoned her family the day before she was due to get married. Her family recalled the entire affair as being completely bizarre. Rock performed an elaborate speaking ceremony, stressing how important it was for women to be submissive to their men. There were tears. Lots of tears, the family recall, but none of them were tears of joy. Claude himself didn't seem like a bad guy. At the end of the ceremony, they offered a huge pot of vegetarian dishes. Solange's mum said it looked like mud, but they ate it anyway. By this time, Giselle had fallen pregnant with their first child. She said she had enough of sharing her husband's affection with a house full of others. And so she went to Rock and said, quote, I don't want to live with all these people, all your rats. She threatened to return home to her father's house if he didn't tell them to leave. This time, Rock didn't use the power of the spoken word to convince Giselle to stay. Instead, he looked at Giselle square in the eye, pulled his arm back and punched his pregnant wife in the face. With her mouth swollen and her nose bloody, he left her locked in a dark room alone for 2 days to think about what she had done. The morning of Monday, June 5th, 1978 was a hectic one at the Healthy Living Clinic. It had come to Rock's attention that while revenue was on the up, the next month would be difficult. Having been kicked out of the Seventh-day Adventists and not having access to the SDA's literature and natural food products to sell in his store, the group were going to struggle. The local press had been publishing articles about Geraldine's death and Rock's involvement, and the local merchants were banging on the door each day to collect on unpaid bills and debt that Rock owed them. After a while, Rock had decided that he would move the entire group. He kept his followers in the dark about this decision, as he did with most major decisions. Rock planned and made decisions for the entirety of the group, without consulting them. He suggested the group should get on the road and travel, selling their wares and goods and offering seminars and vegetarian meals along the way. At this point in time, there were 6 men, 12 women and 2 children. They all packed up the school bus and their car. Both of these vehicles were painted blue with the clinic's names stained across the sides in white, and they left the clinic behind before the sun had come up. The parents of Rock's followers would submit missing persons reports, and people were asked to keep an eye out for the group and their caravan. On July 6th, after weeks of travelling, Rock began spouting to the group about the Book of Revelation, and how the 7th angel had unleashed a wrath of God upon the earth, where there were flashes of lightning and giant hailstones dropping on men from heaven. Rock told his followers that this prophecy would come true on February the 17th, 1979. But there was no need to worry because Rock had been appointed as God's personal emissary, and that he and his followers would escape the rapture, and that they would be safe with Rock. They would be the sole survivors and begin a new society. 3 days later, the group packed up their caravan and set out on foot to find their new living quarters. Trudging through the forest, eventually they found what they were looking for, and this took the shape of an isolated foothill by a small body of water named Dry Lake. The nearest road was a 4-hour walk away. Rock declared the foothill was now to be known as the Eternal Mountain. The group pitched up and set up tents, going back and forth to retrieve their belongings from the roadside, carrying tools and cooking utensils and supplies. Each member would wake up at 5 a.m, and they would all work until way after sunset. They cut down trees to construct a cabin under Rock's orders. Jacques and Claude used a pickaxe and a shovel to dig away at the ground. They did this all summer, and when they finally reached water, Rock declared it a miracle. Others would carry rocks and make a fireplace, or looked after Gabrielle Nadeau as her condition worsened. Gabrielle Lavallee recalls the hard labour, saying they worked like pioneers. Rock, of course, excluded himself from hard labour, claiming that his stomach and his cancer made it impossible for him to exert himself. Claude recalls how they never ate breakfast, that lunch was always a small portion, and that food was always on his mind. In September, the cabin was finally ready. It was crude at best. Members slept in bunks that were only a metre apart, and there were thin sheets that were used as curtains. At this time, Rock renamed his followers, giving them biblical names. Giselle became Esther, meaning star. Solange became Rachel, meaning lamb. Gabrielle Lavallee became Thirster, meaning charmer. Francine became Hogler, meaning partridge. Nicole became Deborah, meaning queen bee. Chantel became Ruth, meaning companion. Jose became Noah, meaning comfort. Maurice became Sarah, meaning princess. Maurice Grenier became Rebecca, meaning ensnarer. And her husband Jacques became Nathan, meaning what God gives. Jacques became Boaz, meaning the one with strength. And Gabrielle Nadeau became Muckler, meaning beauty. Jacques Fissé became Joshua, meaning of whom God is salvation. At this point, Rock declared himself to be addressed and known as Moses. After this turn of events, a few members would decide to leave the group. Yolande Guinevere returned to France, and Leo-Marc Fortier, who had given his life savings to Rock, loaded his things into a horse-drawn wagon and left the commune with his wife and child. Rock didn't try to stop them, but proclaimed to the group that they were evil. Night after night, he forced his exhausted followers to listen to his ramblings of evil, and manipulate his followers into sharing their deepest, darkest secrets in order to exploit them and use them as proof that his followers' parents were all spawns of the devil. The group often referred to Rock as Papi and Giselle as Mammy. Members do recall happy times within the group, where they would often get dressed up in wigs and outfits and perform plays directed by Rock. They mention how Rock would perform outlandish skits and have the group rolling around with laughter. But this also came with Rock's ever-growing obsession with religion and the literal interpretations of verses in the Bible that he would use to justify his harsh actions and violence. He grew a long beard and wore his robes and appeared biblical. Soon, Rock would begin claiming that to withhold himself sexually from the other women in the group was selfish. Giselle, being 6 months pregnant, came to find out that Nicole, who had been married by Rock to Jacques Fizet, had intercourse with Rock in the cabin whilst everyone else worked. Giselle ran into the woods crying, with Rock hot on her tail. He found her in the woods and threw her down, strangling her and proclaiming that he was Moses and her master, threatening that the Lord would crush her skull if she did not obey him. The book I followed for a lot of this research breaks away briefly at this point to mention that while all of this is happening, Jim Jones and the People's Temple had gathered their things and fled to Guyana. Apparently, Rock followed the news in Guyana with fascination, proclaiming that he had a premonition of the tragic events that unfolded in Jonestown a year before they actually happened. Cults became the centre of media focus, and people soon started realising when Rock and his followers entered the nearby towns of Gaspé that there was something not quite right with the group. They recognised some of the signs from Jonestown. The police picked Rock up one day, shopping, and he was dressed in his tunic. Not wanting to cause any trouble, Rock agreed to a ton of psychiatric tests when the police had no grounds to hold him. These evaluations would lead to speculation of schizophrenia, but the doctor announced that he would need more time with Rock to be sure. Rock had portrayed an image of himself as a gentle leader, and this would be the image that police would become used to seeing for months and months ahead. This meant that the dangers to the group went further unnoticed.